Today's Sex and Space charity shout-out is one very close to Robyn Salisbury's heart. It's called Aotearoa, Parenting from the Start. This is a fledgling charity which is set up to support and inform parents and caregivers across cultures to help them make their own decisions about raising their tamariki. And Robyn believes it offers significant improvements on other antenatal programs. Aotearoa Parenting from the Start is a fantastic initiative, and your support would be greatly appreciated by Robyn, of course, and all of us here at Sex in Space.
Sex, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the speculative interdimensional vehicle, Sex in Space. Its mission, to explore new points of view, to seek out fresh opinions, to boldly go where so many have gone before, and still somehow manage to totally miss the point. Subscribe to Sex in Space, wherever quality podcasts are found.
Hi, I am Tim.
And I'm Jess.
And welcome to another episode of Sex in Space. This is a mega project that explores sex across all of its infinite dimensions.
Yes, this is where we turn the awkward into the straightforward and have some fun doing it. And today we are talking to the incredible Robyn Salisbury, something of a national treasure in New Zealand, founder of Sex Therapy New Zealand and our local sex-centric agony aunt in the Sunday Star Times. They actually hated it when I called them an agony aunt. I think they found it misogynist. So I think, not to undermine what Robyn does, Robyn has been writing a sex column for years in the Sunday Star Times, and it's one of the only visible mainstream spaces where we've had conversations about sex. They're a clinical psychologist, a sex specialist, author of Staying in Love, and now the second book, which came out in 2020, Free to Be Children, which they talk about on this podcast, and it's really interesting to hear what the inspiration and the stories are around that. Robyn advocates for healthy intimacy, pleasure at any age, and the vitality of a life in which needs, desires, and boundaries can be communicated freely. If that's not the most beautiful intention statement I've ever heard, I don't know what is. I really hope you enjoyed this podcast. It was such a pleasure and a treat to have Robyn with us, and an honour to take up some of her time. So, yeah, enjoy.
And now, the interview.
Honestly, such an honour to have you here today. We've been so delighted to have someone with your vast experience to come and speak with us. So, yes, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Jess, I feel honoured to be invited.
So, I guess for a lot of people, they'd think, how on earth do you get to sex therapy? There's not a university course of that kind. How did you end up doing where you are now?
No, there is not a university course. I will tell you how close we got to that in a minute. But how I got there is the same with my whole life. I kind of follow my nose. So I was in my early 20s, had a young child, got a part-time job as a community house coordinator in a little subdivision that was near where I lived. And I found that the women who used the house talked to me about their problems, and I didn't know how to help. And so I sought some counselling training, and at that point I had no money, and so the only kind of free training was to train as a marriage guidance counsellor. And I was really fortunate. They had a very vigorous selection process, and I was fortunate to be selected. And I was 27 at that point, I think, which was one of their youngest ever counsellors. And I loved it. It was a wonderful, wonderful experiential training. I still think of that as my apprenticeship. And so my beginning model was training in couples counselling, and I had the very good fortune to have the supervision of Joan Lust, who was a very early sex therapist in the Wellington district. And Joan got me asking my clients questions about their sexual experiences right from the outset. And that's what got me started. And it was mind-boggling and very challenging for me. You know, I still remember quite clearly walking up and down the office one day before my clients arrived saying, penis, 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 masturbate, 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 because I could not get my lips and tongue used to getting around those words I'd never said out loud before. And so I developed a stutter, you know, and I was thinking, oh, this isn't impressive, and I want to put my clients at their ease, so I better practice. And nowadays, my husband would tell you that those words and many others slip off my tongue all too readily and loudly. But it did take practice. And in the family I grew up in, we didn't talk about body parts with their proper names, if we talked about them at all. And so it was very new for me to be talking about those issues. And what I found was that when I did ask people about sex, they were so relieved to be able to talk about it. And they often raised concerns that they had. And just by talking about them in really matter-of-fact ways, they were able to achieve some improvements. So that was pretty gratifying, and I think that was part of what led me on my course of developing my knowledge about sex therapy and about the whole dance of intimacy, you know, the intriguing dynamics of couple relationships. That really fascinated me. And so I went on and did a lot more counselling training. I did a degree in psychology. That didn't particularly speak to my needs, but I could tell that getting a qualification was a good idea. I then moved on to train in psychotherapy, and throughout that continued to be really fascinated about issues of sexuality and continued working in that field. And then Kevin and I and our son went on a working holiday in Australia for a year. We lived in a little van and had jobs in various places. And Ryan went to school at some point, but he also he had periods where he was the navigator, and we were keeping a diary every day, and he was writing letters to family at home. So we figured, and his teacher had given us a maths book, so that was his schooling. And that was just time out to think about, okay, where to from here? And for me, I decided I really want to keep doing this kind of work, and I need to get adequate qualifications to do that. So from a job I had in Adelaide of restringing Venetian blinds, I applied to join the clinical program, completely unaware that training as a clinical psychologist was hugely competitive, limited places and lots of applications. And I was selected, luckily, and so I trained to be a clinical psychologist. And throughout that time, issues of sexuality were barely on the curriculum, but I continued my private study of that. And then once I'd qualified, just continued to work with couples and pursue training, went to quite a number of international conferences, read hugely, continue to read a lot, and joined a British Association of Sex Therapists and then an American based one, which aims to be an international association. So learned a huge amount from my international peers too. Oh, it was just so exciting, so much to learn and so much happening. And it was in 2002 that I set up, began to develop training courses, because I thought, I want more people to know about this. I want, I want to share all of the knowledge that I've developed. So I set up a foundation course in sex therapy, and I ran dozens of those, I think, over the years, and then also advanced training in sex therapy. And I remain really proud of those. I'm delighted with how they were received, and I really enjoyed being able to gather with other people who were interested in that field and really grapple with issues of sexuality and the lenses through which people were invited to look at them and to be able to challenge those. Because, you know, in the early 2000s, that was the era, I think, where the PDE5 inhibitors, which are drugs like Viagra and Cialis, were introduced and really pushed. And so we had the whole medicalisation of sexuality, and there was quite a strong model of sexual dysfunction, which I was challenging, because I think a sexual function and dysfunction model really creates performance anxiety. You know, can I measure up? Am I doing it well enough? Is my erection hard enough? Is it lasting long enough? Am I reaching orgasm soon enough? And so I enjoyed getting people to look at all those socio-cultural and political pressures and then reflect on the richness and variety of erotic experience and how that got lost in that, you know, in the midst of those models, and what would be required for people to reclaim it and to help their clients to reclaim their own eroticism.
So is it a matter of kind of going, there's nothing wrong, or like moving away from good and bad, like dysfunction and function, into a model of difference? Like, how would you?
Yep. Well, you know, the number of people who would come along saying, "Oh, I've got hyposexual desire disorder. My GP diagnosed me and has sent me to you."
Great.
And then we'd look at the lack of interest and desire, but maybe not a lack of interest, but a lack of desire or a lack of arousal, and could often easily and quickly understand that actually the sex that the person had been having wasn't very desirable to them. So why the hell would they desire it? You know, and if your conditions for being sexual or your conditions for arousal are not being met, or maybe you're not even aware of them, then it's a significant risk that you're going to end up not being interested in being sexual when you would like to be, or if there's pressure to be sexual, or if there are strains in a relationship, or someone's having casual sex but inside them they're not comfortable with not knowing if they can trust their partner. You know, there's so many factors that go into allowing someone to be sexual if they want to.
I'm kind of interested in where you came from. Like, what kind of family did you come from? You mentioned you didn't talk much about bodies, but what did your sex education look like at home and at school?
One of my earliest memories is of sitting in the bath with my big sister Marion. She would have been about 5 or 6. My little brother Kevin, who would have been maybe 18 months or so, and me, who must have been about 3 or 4, and my mother with her pinny on saying, "If you don't stop playing with that thing and making it go hard, it will fall off." and me thinking, oh, maybe that's what happened to mine. So there was a
so you had
context.
a sense of loss? You thought you'd lost something?
I did.
Ah, fascinating.
And I spent periods of time through my early childhood trying to figure out how to pee standing up. Penis envy, I guess.
Wow.
I wanted to have one. And at one point I had been given a little toy chemistry set as a Christmas present. And one of the test tube had broken at the bottom, and I thought, here's my chance. So I could stand up and pee through this test tube. And I thought I was really cool.
That's amazing.
It was a little bit messy, I have to say. You had to cite it correctly. But yeah, no clear information about bodies or sexuality at home. I remember discovering what I thought was a flying saucer in the bathroom, on a seat in the bathroom, and running in to tell Mum. And it turned out, I only worked this out afterwards, it was her diaphragm that she'd been washing. And she would just push me out the way and raced and got it and went and hid it. And I was left puzzled about what was the flying saucer and how come it was Mum's, and we weren't going to get to talk about it.
Yeah, where was your flying saucer?
Yeah. Yeah. And then my sister got her period quite early, so she was given a book. I think the manufacturers of sanitary napkins, Johnson & Johnson, produced this little guide to your body. She was given that book, and she passed that on to me. So I would have been maybe about 9 when I read that. And I don't remember what it told me, but I don't have a sense it was particularly helpful. And then at intermediate school, we had, here's our binary model, you know, boys and girls separately got to see a film on the birds and the bees. And I think our parents were asked to come, though goodness knows why, and no discussion about it. And then in the 5th form, my 5th form biology teacher, who was male, got his wife, who was a nurse, to come and do the lesson on reproduction. And honestly, by his abdication of that role, I think he taught us more about the awkwardness of sexuality than anything else. And that was about it. So really, I came to the delight of being able to talk about issues of sexuality from a background of ignorance and puzzlement. And I think another factor, when I was about 14 or 15, Mum and Dad bought a dairy, and so I got access to Penthouse and Playboy magazines.
Right.
And so that was education of a sort.
Yeah, I think those are really valuable, interesting sources, right? So you've got these formal channels, which is sort of the home and the school, and then kind of like self-exploration. Was that also a
absolutely. Yeah. The reading of the magazines was very arousing. However, it also taught me that my body didn't look like theirs, and so I assumed mine was quite inadequate. And I was a late developer, so I went from a nickname of pancakes to a nickname of boobs, felt like almost overnight. You know, once my breast development started, then it burgeoned. And I was extremely uncomfortable about that. And I think it was around that time that I began to develop an eating disorder. So I went from being pretty tall and skinny to being quite overweight, and just putting a layer of fat around my body because I didn't know what to do with the way people would respond to my breasts. You know, I remember crossing the road once and a guy leaning out of the car and going with his tongue, and me thinking, ugh, you know, just feeling shamed, really. So I was very uncomfortable in my body. And then having an eating disorder where you feel like a pig and you're fat and out of control and all of that, while it covered my sexuality, it also shamed me too. So it became quite a vicious cycle, really. So it had a lot of sorting out to do.
Yeah, that's actually quite a common story, hey?
I know.
Like the sudden moment of sexualization and then desperately trying to find strategies to disguise that or lean into it. Some people lean into that moment as well.
Yes, yeah, well, good on them if they can. The models that I had with the Playboy and Penthouse, you know, there was no way I felt like I could act like that. And I also subsequently understood that was a very, masculine perspective of eroticism. And it didn't fit me, you know. Women's sexual fantasies are not always, but quite often different. I mean, there's a whole range, of course, and there's a whole range for men, but the things that were portrayed in those magazines were not of interest to me particularly, or didn't speak to me, I should say that. There was also a little magazine, I think it was called Health and Efficiency, that was a nudist magazine. And unlike the Penthouse and Playboy, it had photos of naked men, so it was at least able to look at those bodies because I'm heterosexual.
Yeah.
And so that was of great interest to me, and thinking, oh, right, okay.
And was this in the era when those magazines still had pubic hair? Like, was that...
Oh, absolutely. You're talking to someone who still has pubic hair.
Oh, no, myself too. But no, I'm just fascinated because I know there was this moment when Playboy came out with the Teenage Dreams, a Teenage Dreams edition.
Okay.
And then that tipped the balance and everyone started getting Brazilians, and then, it became commonplace for pornography of any kind.
No, it
hair
was
to
definitely
disappear.
prior to that. That would have been
wonderful.
early 1970s, I think.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes. The great time of Bush. Wonderful.
Mm.
So for you, it sounds like you've been through so many shifts, so I feel rude asking for a sort of superlative, but I'm wondering for you, what has been your biggest shift in this realm, if you had to kind of...
Oh, personally or professionally?
Personally, I'm interested in personally, yeah.
I think learning to inhabit my body. So from the upbringing that I had and my early experiences and my eating disordered years, I was quite out of touch with my body and felt so uncomfortable about her. And I don't know how I found my way there. Someone told me about Hecate Women's Health Collective in Wellington, and I don't actually remember much of what happened there, but I do remember there was a poster on the wall of a woman, and it said, I can... now I can't remember the words, but something about living in my body. I can accept my body all the way out to her edges or something like that. And I love that sense of her edges. This is me. This is my body. I get to say how it is. I get to look after it or not. It felt like a claiming of agency, and that was really important to me. And then even further so, when I got pregnant with our son, that was the first time in my life I felt really good about my body because it was doing something magnificent. And I actually lost a huge amount of weight during that pregnancy, not because I was trying to or I was restricting my eating, but because I felt good about my body. I wanted to look after her, and so I did. And that was really important too.
So for you, is there this might be obvious, but is there a relationship between feeling kind of at home in your body, what you're talking about, and your sex life?
I think it's an important, crucial, really. You have to be able to inhabit your body. You have to be able to tolerate pleasure. I think that's an interesting concept of pleasure tolerance that one of my American colleagues introduced me to, that there are many people for whom pleasure is seen as a sort of self-indulgence or something frivolous, and they're getting on with being, high-achieving or whatever, whereas to recognise and rejoice in all of our senses and to celebrate them is an important part of being able to own your own sexuality and enjoy it, I think. So there were lots of ongoing learnings in that for me.
So interesting, isn't it? Because you can kind of imagine a different kind of sex education that what would a sex education written by Robyn Salisbury look like, if we were
Well, I think it
school?
begins at birth.
Yeah.
In our responses to our children and grandchildren and any children, being able to see their delight in their own little bodies, because children know how to inhabit their bodies, and being able to mirror that delight to them and normalise it and use normal body terms to describe parts of the body and to answer children's questions. Children guide us in what they need to know. I don't think we have to prepare a syllabus for them when they're little. They ask lots of questions. We were talking about pubic hair before. My oldest grandson asked me when he was about 3, I think, Grandma, why have you got hair on your willy? And I thought, oh, where do I start with this? And I was also very aware of my role as a mother-in-law, rather than, like there were others to negotiate through, I think, in terms of self-education, sex education. But in the moment, I wanted to respond well. So I said to him, oh, girls and women haven't got willies, haven't got penises. I wouldn't use that word. We've got vaginas. And he said, oh, can I see it? And fortunately, he had just been telling me that at daycare they'd been learning that bottoms were private. So I was able to say to him, no, because remember what you said about bottoms are private, because I thought this was the mother-in-law bit, thinking, oh, if he went home and said to his mum and dad, Grandma showed me her vagina today, I might get in trouble. But I was also able to say, and this here grows when you go through puberty, which happens when you're maybe about 12 or 13 or whenever, and then you grow some hair on your body. And I thought, okay, that'll be enough for now. And he was satisfied with that. And I didn't need to shame him or tell him off. And I hope it was an adequate response.
And now, this.
This is the GBC. Time for a commercial break.
Barbarella's. Aroused? Then port yourself to Barbarella's. We've been providing non-judgmental carnal appeasement to the underfondled for over 29 Gaussian units. Are you a multi-limbed, chlorine-breathing arthropod from the Triangulum galaxy and despairing of ever having a group grope? A furred catamite from Phallus 12 looking to be rubbed up the wrong way? Or just a transsexual gas being from the Magellanic Cloud who wants to experiment with solid objects? At Barbarella's, you can. Just 9 parsecs off the northern celestial hemisphere in the beautiful constellation of Virgo, Barbarella's is open 36 hours a day, 9 days a week, and our magnificent play beings are just waiting for you to coalesce in our quadrant. Barbarella's, your pleasure is our business.
This message brought to you by Never Dry, Virgo's trusted name in lubrication.
Now, back to some military-grade chit-chat.
I'm interested too in because I guess many people listening might have no idea what sex therapy is. I mean, there must be a raft of misconceptions about what you do. So I guess it'd be useful for you to kind of define that. Yeah.
One of the things I often found myself telling prospective clients in the early days was you get to keep your clothes on.
Yes.
So although in some countries there are some hands-on sex therapists, which are kind of sex surrogates or sex coaches,
yes.
That's not part of what we do in New Zealand. And people come and they usually an opening question for me has been, tell me what it is that's happening or not happening that concerns you or that brings you to me, because I want to normalise whatever it is that their concerns are. And often people come feeling like they have to be embarrassed because they're not measuring up, whereas things happening and not happening kind of broadly covers the range. And so we just get into talking, and our first session we assess really broadly about what are the concerns and what is the context of that in terms of cultural influences, familial influences, political influences. What's the wider context of their life? Are they in a relationship? Usually we're working with couples, so the relationship there is to be looked at, what's going on there, looking at all of the contextual factors and helping people to clarify what it is that they would like to work on changing for themselves. Some people just want to be more happy to say, this is me. I don't choose to be sexual, or I don't choose to have sex. Other people want to have their first orgasm, or I've helped a woman in her 70s have her first ever orgasm, and I've helped women in their 60s have their first ever sex, right through to, sex is painful, or I'm bored. The whole intercourse-centric model of sexuality, as if we have to have intercourse. And
do you mean penis and vagina? Is that sort of the
well, penetrative sex is assumed to be the norm, whereas it's not what many people choose at all.
Thank you, Sigmund Freud.
Yeah.
We are so grateful. There must be an enormous stigma, I would imagine, too, because I know floating around in the culture there's this idea that we're all meant to be magically mind readers about what your partner wants, and you meant to sort of arrive into your sex life already brilliant at it.
Yeah,
so there must be an enormous
primed
stigma
and ready to roll. I know.
For people coming because they go, I have to admit that I'm not a good lover. Not perfect.
Yeah. I am often reassuring people that no one is a good lover, and if just because with your last partner, the two of you were really happy with your sex, doesn't mean you're a good lover, because actually you've got now a new partner to get to know, and there's a whole new body and a whole new individual, and you two have got a dance of intimacy to learn that is going to involve each of you saying, this is me, this is what I like to the extent I know, this is what I'd like to try. Oh, okay, you want to try that? All right, let's give that a go. Or no, I'm not comfortable with that. So that working out of an us way forward is a process, and it can take years. And I encourage people to enjoy that process too, and be able to laugh, For a period of time when I set up Sex Therapy New Zealand, I had an administrator, and one of her first pieces of feedback to me was, I can't believe how much laughter I hear coming through your door. And this sex ought to be fun. It ought to be playful.
I've started reading your book, Staying in Love, which seems to me very much directed towards monogamous couples.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I'm kind of interested in what your experience, or what your... Yeah, I imagine only monogamous couples come to see you. What was your experience around polyamory or asexuality or these alternatives,
Yeah. No, that's not the case. That's all I work with. It's interesting that in the era in which I wrote that book, so it was being written sort of 2007, 2008, I think we brought it out early 2009, polyamory was not openly talked about. Affairs certainly were, but because... the nature of an affair is that often it's not negotiated openly, so it is experienced as a breach of contract, a breach of trust, and so monogamy ruled in terms of what people were willing to talk about at that point. Subsequent to that, yes, polyamory is talked about a lot more, and initially my exposure to it was more with couples who'd struck problems, They had negotiated it. They wanted an open relationship. They thought they had a good understanding, but then one would find it really threatened them, or one would fall in love with someone and want to leave them. And so there was that pull back to a monogamous relationship and a betrayal of the contract. And so it took quite a while over time for me to then move into, or then to be consulted by couples who were saying, help us do this. We don't want a monogamous relationship. We want to recognise that each of us want a range of sexual experiences because of the whole fluidity of sexuality, of gender, of orientation, of preferences, of everything. We want to recognise our whole selves. We want to be able to do that within the context of this relationship. And so, to some extent, my learning was driven by what was demanded of me from my clients and from training courses. And I know with the STNZ team, there were members of the team, are members of the team that are polyamorous, they live polyamorous lifestyles. And so we were able to have some really rigorous discussions, you know. And I always remember one of them challenging me that my choice for monogamy and for wanting that exclusivity, my personal choice, reflected my insecurity. And me challenging him back about his butterfly behaviour, you know. He couldn't settle on anyone. So we'd have these good-hearted debates that just helped us explore all of the issues and continue to upskill ourselves, really.
So you have seen a shift or a moment, a cultural moment of that conversation opening up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In various ways, you know. When I developed the training courses back in 2002, I think, or maybe even been earlier than that, I'm not sure, we covered all of the range of the wonderful variety that nature produces in human bodies and human sexuality, and society's struggle in dealing with that. And that was very much in that era not talked about openly. And, you know, I will never forget a young couple who came to see me, and they were totally overwhelmed by having just given birth and been told that their baby was intersex. And they were horrified and just really stuck about how on earth they were going to answer people's questions about what did you have. And so through that time, I've known and been preparing the team, and the team has continued to become skilled in dealing with all of those issues of gender diversity and fluidity. And so we've watched society seeing, okay, you're going to have to catch up with this, you're going to have to face it. And now that is talked about more openly. We've still got a long way to go, I think. And it concerns me that we've still got quite a way to go to accept people being in same-sex relationships. And these are people who can fit a binary model. They can say, I'm a woman and I love a woman, or I'm a man and I love a man. But to have people who are saying, I don't identify with any of those categories, I'm me, and I don't know who I'll choose to have sex with or whether I'll choose to have sex, and I'll work that out, and maybe it will be this and maybe it will be that, and maybe some of all sorts, and, you know, there's a lot of people running scared about that, I think. And in a society that still struggles in some sectors to accept homosexuality, I'm not surprised, I guess.
And in terms of asexuality, how do you position that inside your kind of framework and worldview?
Well, it has not often been an issue that people have consulted me about, because when you can recognise that you are asexual, you don't choose to change that. When it's arisen in the couples I've been working with, and it has been in couples, it's been when someone has recognised, I don't want to be sexual, I don't enjoy sex, I never have, I'm doing this for you, this is me, I am asexual. And then that's experienced as a breach of contract. You know, we entered into this relationship, I understood that you did want me, why are you telling me this 5 years down the track? And does this mean you want me to live a life of celibacy? And so then we look at other options and what can be negotiated, and is this the end of this relationship, or is there a degree of openness and tolerance and that can be, you know, achieved.
Wow. That's not easy work.
It's fascinating work. Yeah, it's never been boring.
What do you love about it?
I love that, well, I feel honoured by people trusting me. I love how quickly I can help people settle down and find their comfort and then their joy in being able to grapple with issues of sexuality. I love the changes that I see people making, seeing them come alive, have a bounce in their step, grow their sensuality. You know, when you've been doing sex therapy with people and then they turn up and say, "Oh, look at that clematis on your fence. Isn't it glorious?" And you think, yes. That they're smelling the roses, you know.
I love that as a litmus test.
Yeah, sort of. It beats a focus of, God, don't you get overwhelmed by all the weeds in your garden? And then I think, okay, so I've got some depression going on here, perhaps. Because I have found, so it's a bit of a sideways step, but working with sexuality is an insight into the psyche. So as a psychotherapist and clinical psychologist, you know, I've had a general practice as well. I deal with all kinds of psychological issues and issues of humanity. Being able to venture into sexuality helps to inform general kind of ways of being in the world, and vice versa. So it's deepened and broadened my practice, I think.
And you must have seen such enormous shifts. You've talked a little bit about it, but some enormous shifts over your time working in this space in Aotearoa. I'm kind of interested in what big kind of crunchy points you've seen. Is it the way that you think about it?
I don't really. I think more about the struggles, and we've still got to go. You know, I hate that if you're gay and you work at as a teacher in a Catholic school, you're having to present a syllabus that says, you know, we will tolerate homosexuals graciously, but as long as they don't ever seek out someone to love them and to share their bodies with, I think that's agonising. And I still come across people who are being denigrated in their workplace for their sexual orientation or their expression of self. So I'm very aware of the pain that is still ongoing. I've worked with quite a few transgender people who are in the process of transitioning. So they've called themselves transgender. Some have done magnificently. They've prepared their workplace. They've called on people who have been very supportive, who've created policy in order to make it safe for they and others to then be themselves in their own workplaces. So that's been really heartening. But I'm just aware we've still got a long way to go. And that will be ongoing for always, I'm sure.
I'm interested too in whether, because I know that consent culture is something that's really blossomed inside my lifetime, and I wondered if that has had flow-on effects that you've seen inside your work or literacy in that space. I don't know.
I know about the work that's being done in that field. I'm horrified at how many gaps there still are in sex education in this country. So I'll just jump on a little hobby horse there. It's part of the book that I will be talking to you about later. But in, I think it was 2015, the Ministry of Education contracted an academic to produce guidelines for sex education syllabus. I think she did a brilliant job. It's comprehensive, it's inclusive, it's respectful, and it covers everything. And she's really clear about the need to embed it in every age throughout the syllabus, and in order for sexuality to become just a part of what we learn. And certainly consent is a part of that. But I'm sorry to say that the surveys that have been done subsequent to that, and that's, you know, in the last 4 years, show that many schools are not giving sex education. And I understand about the challenges and the complexities, but they're mandated to teach it, and it is essential for our tamariki, our children. It's for their well-being. They need to understand they are sexual beings and that's just a part of who they are, and they need to understand about their bodies, and they need to know they're in charge of their body, and they need to understand about consent, and they need to be empowered to be able to say, no, I don't want you to do that. And that's not happening nowhere near enough.
Yeah, they can uptake it if they wish, is my understanding. And
well, they're mandated to teach a sex education, health and sex education. Just part of what is expected.
So, I mean, if you were to reflect back on yourself and kind of go, with everything you know now, what do you wish that you had learned as, I don't know, 15-year-old? Fifth form Robyn, yeah.
That I'm good enough.
Yeah.
That would have been great.
Just as a person or as a sexual person? Or
Well, both.
Yeah.
Both. You know, you asked me for some songs that I like, and I named Helen Reddy singing I Am Woman, and then I went and listened to it, watched it on YouTube, and I just cried because, you know, even now, I'm 62, I'm hugely more confident than I have been. So progressively, I've worked on that really hard. But to stand out there on a stage, I'm going to start crying now just thinking about it. Okay. And to present your body and say, you know, I am woman, and, you know, hear me roar. In order for me to speak up, I need to always work through a hurdle of what's sometimes called imposter syndrome. You know, do I know enough? Am I good enough? Will I be able to talk about this? You know, who's going to pull me apart? All of that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I'm good enough would be a good message for children to be getting.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear you say that as somebody who's called on all the time, I imagine, as an expert in your field. It's interesting to hear that that feeling sticks around.
Yes. Yes. And I mean, for the last few years, I haven't, in 2010, I think others took over Sex Therapy New Zealand. So there were other directors, and they've been doing more of the media interviews. And I've just been relieved about that, you know, back into the background. I think partly I'm an introvert, and I have to really organise extrovert moments, but also that self-doubt. You know, I don't think I'll ever fully be able to say I've conquered it. I can work through it. I can still find me and express me, you know, for better or worse sometimes, but it'll always be there.
I think it's so powerful, because that does sit under all of our kind of relationship experiences. If you, at a bone level, don't feel that you're enough, everything is just going to be so much harder. That doubt is just so much crunchier, you know, everything.
Yeah. Yes, it certainly does. That the individual that we take into a relationship shapes what's possible until you do the work of addressing it.
I'm interested in what your latest book.
It was not a project that I planned to do or anything. In fact, I had no plans to write another book. I'd done one. I was satisfied with that. It's a lot of work, and writers in New Zealand certainly don't earn much from that huge amount of work. But there was a series of events that happened 2 years ago, so July 2017, within a period of just a couple of weeks, 4 very powerful experiences that led me to decide that I was going to edit a book on addressing child sexual abuse in this country. So that's the negative side of my work, is that I have often been working with people who have experienced childhood sexual abuse and are trying to wanting to claim their sexuality and claim sexual pleasure, and all of the work that they've had to do for that. And so I've been very mindful of the harm that is done, and also mindful that throughout my career, at the beginning, I really wanted to be able to help people feel good about their sexuality, help people form strong relationships that meet their needs, create beautiful children, provide safe places for them to grow up in, all of that kind of thing. And, here 30 years later, the prevalence of child sexual abuse is as high as ever, if not higher. And so it was time to do something about that. I felt really compelled to work on that. And I've been stunned and honoured by the number of people who were willing to take part in that. So the book is written by 16 of us. I'm editor. I've written the introduction and a preface and the concluding chapter and 2 chapters on the development of sexuality. One, what's required for that to become constructive, really, for it to allow people to claim their sexuality in ways that are life-enhancing for them. And then what is it that happens that leads to people developing destructive sexual behaviours? So I've grappled with those issues. And we've got the chief censor writing, he's written a brilliant chapter on technology and how that impacts on children and their safety. And there's a forensic paediatrician who's done over 1,000 examinations, assessments of children who've been sexually abused. There's a brilliant and wonderful clinical psychologist who specialised in working with traumatised children, who's written about her work in the field. There's a magnificent Māori woman who actually, in writing about her work with male Māori child sex offenders, has honoured us all with the story of her own childhood sexual abuse and her journey through drug abuse and obesity and prostitution and suicide attempts, through to finding her way to heal and then being able to work with others in the community to help them heal, and being able to work with those who've got harmful sexual behaviours as well as those who've been harmed by it. So many moving chapters, huge expertise, and it's really evident to me that everybody has brought their heart and soul as well as their expertise to the work. So I'm delighted with it.
What's the name of the book?
It's called Free to Be Children.
Free to Be Children.
And then the subtitle is Preventing Child Sexual Abuse in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
And the intended audience? Who do you expect?
I want everybody to read it. The intended audience, I think, is both professional and community members. Anyone who cares about children and wants to help to protect them and make them safe to be all they can be. So I believe the book will speak to all readers about help them find what they can do to make a difference, because it's actually not rocket science, but we haven't had the courage and the will and the momentum to get together in our communities and really make this change happen. And just one little example, I talked about my concerns about what's not happening yet with sex education. I would like as many parents as possible of children at school of all ages to be lobbying their school principal of, hey, we would like this included in the curriculum. We will support you to present this to the school community. We trust that you can do this in a way that will keep our children safe, that you're not going to be, giving them destructive messages or whatever. The reality is, and this has been shown very carefully through research evidence very clearly, is that when children are given sound information and help to make their own decisions, they actually begin sex later in life, and there are far fewer unintended pregnancies. You know, those have to be good outcomes for children, quite apart from anything else that may or may not have been measured as outcomes.
So this has not been in your direct area of work, so this
No.
is just something that's called to you.
It
Or
has.
you've been called to it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Do you want me to talk about those 4 compelling things?
Oh, go for it.
Have we got
Yes,
time?
please. Come
Okay.
on.
Well, as part of my general psychological practice, I do quite a bit of work for the New Zealand Police in my district, and that is giving individual quarterly debriefs to each member of some of the specialist teams, which includes the child protection team and the adult sexual assault team. And one of the detectives from one of those teams was at her final debrief before rotating out of one of those squads into a general CIB squad. And right at the end of the session, she leaned forward in her seat and said to me, "Robyn, what are we going to do about child sexual abuse in this country?" And I was a little bit taken aback, and my reflection in the moment was that she hadn't yet found her way to come to terms with her relative powerlessness, really, about being able to make a difference. And so I shared with her my little theory about how we're all little worker ants, beavering away, doing our bit, and that we have to accept that in our lifetime we may not see significant change, but we strive for excellence and we do what we can. Now, I could see very clearly from the look on her face she wasn't impressed by that answer, but it was the end of the session and I did have another client who was coming soon, and so we finished and she went. And then that night I talked to my friend Sue, who is the child psychologist who has written in the book, and she'd just been through a horror 9 hours of surgery for a nasty cancer, and she was about to go through 30 sessions of radiotherapy. And we were just chatting about, she told me the story of how she had asked her surgeon, "When can I go back to work?" She's very committed. And he had said to her, "So I think you need to be focusing on quality of life." And so she told him, again, I'm going to end up in tears, the story of a little 4-year-old who she'd been working with who had gonorrhea, and the ways as Sue writes in the Free to Be Children, how she goes about helping children to feel safe enough and to claim their own voice, to be able to talk about what's happening to them. And Sue worked as a part of a multidisciplinary team, which meant that then the police were able to get enough evidence to be able to lay charges, and the child was able to be kept safe, made safe, and then the child was able to receive therapy to reclaim their own, ability to be in their body and to feel safe in their body and all of those things. And so Sue told me that experience, and we talked a little bit about how, we had met as we both went through university, through the clinical psychology program, postgrad program, as mature students. And Sue had come from a background as a care and protection social worker in a girls' detention centre, and she had found that most of those girls had been sexually abused. So here they are, sentenced to detention because of their behaviour in the community, but actually nobody was addressing the underlying issues. Anyway, then a day or two later, I went on holiday, and I was walking along a very beautiful walkway beside a beach. This was in the Sunshine Coast in Australia, so it was the middle of winter, and it was warm, and I was wandering along with Kevin, my husband, in my shorts and T-shirt, and just feeling blissfully relaxed and not thinking about any of that. And an instruction was planted in my head. I can't describe it any other way. And it said, "Write for social change." And I was, I wouldn't say taken aback. I felt like I'd received a gift. I didn't quite know what it meant. But that afternoon, while I was lying around resting, I Googled writing for social change, and I learned it was a genre of writing, and that, of course, it was about, addressing issues that you felt needed to be addressed in society. And then the fourth piece was that I remembered that someone we know had been making references to the fact that as he was about to turn 70, he was thinking about writing down his horror, traumatic childhood story as a way to try and lay it to rest. And that man agreed to have me help him write his story and to have that be the opening of Free to Be Children. Wow. So it was a bringing together of those things, and it just felt very clear then that this is a book that needs to be produced, and I want it to spearhead a campaign. It's time for us in Aotearoa to be addressing this issue and making our country safe for our children.
Oh, that is such a gorgeous kōrero about where that book comes from, and now I'm just so hungry to pick it up.
Yeah.
It has been so juicy speaking with you, Robyn. Thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure talking to you, Robyn. I'm so grateful there was not enough time for all of the stories and knowledge that you house, but I just want to leave saying thank you for all of the work you've done in Aotearoa. Thank you for this book that you've written, which I'm really delighted to pick up. And I want to say too that you are enough. And you've been enough today.
And you've been wonderful. You've made me really comfortable. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Robyn.
We survived.
We did it.
I hope you loved listening to that podcast. The best way to get more of Robyn is to buy her books, Staying in Love, which has been out for some time but is still so relevant, about how to maintain a pleasurable and delightful connection in a long-term monogamous relationship over time. And of course her new book, which is a crazy edited edition of people's contributions to how to address child abuse and how important it is to address child abuse in New Zealand. So that's called Free to Be Children, and you can get them anywhere you get your books.
That's right. We're still in our infancy on this podcast journey. We've got some amazing interviews which are already out there into the ether, and we've got some more coming up, so check those out. Asians and Sex, Future of Sex Ed, Ending HIV, etc., etc. So yeah, look them up. We also want to hear from you guys, the audience. We want to hear anything you've got to say on any of the things we've talked about. Any feedback or criticism, if you've got any ideas for future guests or shows, then we just want to simply check in. Drop us a line, send us your pictures, any voice recordings or anything else to hello@sexandspace.com. We'd love to include them in our upcoming episodes, and you can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at sex-and-space.com. That's Sex-and-Space, DOTCOM.
Yeah, and if you enjoyed this podcast, please do drop us. Don't be shy about giving us that 5-star review. It helps so much.
Don't be shy.
On good old Apple Podcasts, if you want to throw in a lovely review, that's great. We definitely will be shouting out our reviews on future episodes, so keep those reviews incredibly sexy. We'd love to hear them. So massive thanks to all of our guests, to the good folks at the Armoury in Porike, to the team at String Theory for their support, to Andrew, Tanya, Brandon, David and Richard for their amazing voices. And thank you to my incredible co-host, Tim Blower.
Incredible.
He really is. And thank you to you for making it all the way through to the end with us. We so appreciate your time.
Sure do.
Join us next week. Bye.
If you found some of this material a little challenging, keep coming back, and we'll make it really challenging.